Hello, world singers. My name is Brooke.
And I'm Tyler.
And this is
Cosmere Conversations.
Welcome back, everybody. We are very excited today to be joined by an extra special guest. We've got Bookborn here with us. Bookborn is an awesome YouTuber who makes all the book-based content, as you may surmise. I know a lot of our patrons and listeners are already fans of yours, Bookborn, and welcome to the podcast. We're so excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Yeah, we really loved the different panels that you did at Dragonsteel Nexus this past year and thought that all of the commentary that you have brought up in your own videos, as well as guesting on some other podcast and YouTube channels, has been really wonderful to hear, and it's just always nice to have the detailed breakdowns of these books and these series that we love so much. You certainly deal with books outside of the Cosmere, so we're not going to necessarily be restricted to only discussing Cosmere things, but for all of our listeners, they should be aware that this is hashtag all spoilers for Cosmere works, and then we're not going to purposefully spoil anything outside of Brandon Sanderson's books. Bookborn, could you start us off, though, with maybe our introductory question of, do you have a favorite character in the Cosmere, and or are you aligned with the specific order of Knight Radiant?
I am, of course, aligned with a specific order of Knight Radiant. How could I not be? I took that quiz the moment it came out. I am a proud Elsecaller.
Love it.
Love it. Yes.
What are your guys' affiliations? It feels important for me to know.
It does, right? It's kind of the way of getting to know someone very quickly. I mean, obviously, everyone in the Cosmere is welcome, but once you know the Order of Knight Radiant, it gives you an extra bit of capital C connection. Generally, I'm pretty strongly with the Windrunner or Stoneward orders. And
I am an edge dancer.
Okay, so we got all different orders represented. That feels good.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly Elsecaller is the best, but we need all types.
Yeah, that's how a team functions. You have to have the balance between the different orders. You can't just go all Windrunners. That's no fun. And I feel like actually as a group, Elsecaller, Windrunner, and Edge Dancer would be pretty dope. Like we don't get to see a whole bunch of orders interacting so far in the Cosmere, maybe in the back half of Stormlight Archive. But once we get multiple powers interacting with one another, well, I'm just really excited to see it. So down the road, when Elsecallers are fully powered and doing their teleportations all over the place, I think it's going to become very clear how awesome the Elsecallers are.
Jasna, Kaladin, and Lift right here would make a good team, I think. So I agree with you. It's a good, well-balanced set of people we have here. I have a crisis about my favorite Cosmere character. I need like at least a top 5. Something about giving a top 1 just feels difficult.
It's too hard.
There's just so many people, and I feel like as the Cosmere has gone on, some of my favorites have changed. And can I say that Kelsey is still my favorite? Like, do you know what I mean?
Wow.
You can say it. It's just, what do you feel deep down in your heart? If Kelsey is number 1, then he's your number 1.
I think it might be Jasna. Jasna might be my number 1. I was also kind of like Tensoon is up there as well, which I think is a little bit of a different answer, maybe.
Yeah, that's a unique pick. I like it.
What is it about the Mistborn world that kind of attracts you, or was that the introduction to your Brandon Sanderson reading? Was it Mistborn Era 1?
In a way, yes. I technically was introduced to Brandon's work through Wheel of Time, actually. My first Brandon books were the 3 Wheel of Times he wrote. But Mistborn was my first entry, which is why I think I heavily have favorite characters from there, even though I would say I prefer Stormlight to Mistborn. I think just like the introduction to the characters in that way, like I noticed my top characters are heavily leaned toward Era 1, which is very interesting.
That is interesting. I know it always feels like you never forget your first Cosmere book. There's always a special place in your heart for it. My first was Warbreaker, and that's definitely like still a very special book to me.
Warbreaker is my favorite Cosmere book, so that is
Really?
that's a good pick.
Yeah, it's so solid. I am just so upset that we don't have a sequel yet.
Always
Did you know
waiting.
I asked Brandon about the sequel the first time I ever went to one of his signings?
Oh my gosh.
That would have been, I think the first signing I went to of his was for Shadows of Self. I think that was 2015. And I asked, when's the Warbreaker sequel? And he basically said, don't hold your breath, which I think was a pun.
That's an excellent pun and good advice, because it would have been 10 years or so. Then you're still waiting and still likely to be waiting for a while based on
A
the
long
recent,
time. Yeah.
State of the Sanderson. Does not have Warbreaker at the top of the list, unfortunately.
Okay, so we know how you got into the Cosmere. Tell us a little bit about your like reading journey. Obviously, you're into books of all types. Were you always a reader? Did you come to reading later in life? Like, tell us a little bit about your history with books.
Yeah, I was always a reader. I've been a reader for as long as I can remember. My sister was a huge reader and would introduce me to a lot of different books. My sister is a super wide type of reader. I mean, I am too, but lesser. I feel like she read everything when she was a kid, but I would always attach to any fantasy she gave me from like a very young age, to the point where I've tried to research it. Like I've tried to be like, what is going on in a brain that just attaches to fantasy so deeply, like from such a young age. So I pretty much have been reading fantasy since I could read for myself.
Yeah. I love that. I think both of us were also readers for as long as we can remember. Me and my two brothers, like I just remember in the summers we would go to the library every week and come back with just, I mean, stacks and stacks of books and just sit in our rooms, read. We'd be done with them all in like 3 days. And my mom would be like, well, we're not going back to the library for another, 4 days. So guess you're going to have to read them again.
Yeah, big fan of libraries here. Certainly spent more than a few recesses as a young boy in the school library. I think Encyclopedia Brown was my go-to. I liked those mystery stories when I was young. But then the Scholastic Book Fair, I don't know if that came around to your schools, but that was always my jam. Big week for us.
Yeah.
Scholastic Book Fair is the event of the year. And now that I have kids, we get Scholastic Book Fairs, and you best believe I am there volunteering. And like, I of course give my kids money because like,
Yeah.
do we need more books? Absolutely not. Can you miss a Scholastic Book Fair? Also, no.
Yeah. My grandma was a teacher, and they would get these like Scholastic catalogs maybe like twice a year. And she got books either discounted, or there was like a system of, if she purchased so many for her classroom, then she got like credits to get free books or something. So she would give us the catalogs, and it was like Christmas. We got to like circle the books that we wanted, and then we got like new free books from grandma.
This isn't a visual medium, but if it was, I have one of those catalogs,
Oh
I
my
think right over there
gosh!
on my desk, because my kids bring them home. You get them like once a quarter.
Yeah.
Those little paper ones, and like you
Yeah.
still get them. So
Oh, I love that. I love to know that that still
Still out there.
exists for the kids of today.
That's amazing. And I think that kind of shared history and that background with reading as a young person, you're obviously talking about how you introduced your kids to that, and that like enthusiasm around reading leads me to the question, did you find an answer when you were doing that research about like what in the brain connects to a fantasy story? Or was that more just like a, one night Wikipediaing with a glass of wine or something like that? What was kind of the answer that you got from any of that researching?
that topic idea was actually a topic that was like one of the first things I ever wrote down when I thought I was going to make a blog like a decade ago. Like this was something that has been haunting me for years, and I have never been able to find an answer. I have searched and searched and searched from like official sources, non-official sources, and nothing rings to me as like any sort of research. Because who's doing that research? Nobody.
How do you?
Who's going to give me the grant?
Yeah.
Like who's give me the grant to do the research? I couldn't find anything, and that's why I've never made a video on it because there wasn't anything conclusive, unfortunately.
Well, that's very good on you to, not put out just a
It's
lackluster
a very
video.
Elsecaller quality.
However, here on this speculative podcast where I can make up any of the rules, I wanna go a step further. Let's just guess. Let's
Oh my
guess
gosh.
about what we think it could be, because I think that there's one answer that maybe is like very common, which is the escapism aspect. Fantasy story allows a person to go into another world and kind of escape their own situation. So I can imagine to anyone's young brain that that's a fun little bit. Do you think that rings true, or what's your working theory
Wait,
on this?
I want to give my theory.
Okay, Brooke and then Bookborn. We'll just go in order here.
My theory is that it's kind of like dreaming, like our brains sort of like make up stuff while we're sleeping in order to like process things that we're learning or cement certain ideas or like explore new things and make connections. And basically that's what reading fantasy is. Like, I think I enjoy reading fantasy because it's removed from our day-to-day, our, mundane world. I think it gives sort of a safer or more interesting or more free environment to explore themes, which we do in the Cosmere a lot, from religion to philosophy to relationships to, obviously one of the huge themes in Brandon's work is empathy and imagining, understanding people who live differently than you do. But I think all of that is a little bit easier to like make in the brain in a more fluid atmosphere.
So like purposeful dreaming. Is
Yeah.
that a good? Okay, nice. Bookborn, what do you think?
Well, there's a few things. I think escapism is an interesting topic because I think people often oversimplify that. Escapism is a word that could be used for regular fiction as well, anything that isn't real. I was particularly curious about how there are certain perhaps personality types. I studied engineering in college, and there is this stereotype that engineering students, math students, STEM, and kind of majors, like they heavily lean towards fantasy. And I wondered at that connection, like why are these people who are considered like super analytical also the same individuals who are very dominant in what we would call nerd culture? Like what connection is there? I couldn't find an answer. That was kind of what I was looking at. Like I wanted brain chemistry. Like how are these two disparate things somehow put together? Also, most books for children are fantasy. When you think of picture books, very few famous picture books are not an element of fantasy. The Hungry Caterpillar anamorphizes a caterpillar. The Bad Case of Stripes, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs,
Yeah.
Bill Pete. Like most children's books are fantasy. And even when they get into middle grade, when do we lose fantasy? It's when we tend to become young adults to adults. People tend to all of a sudden have this switch on, well, fantasy is for children. And why is that? And who keeps on to fantasy and who doesn't? And there isn't like necessarily a huge answer. Some of it's cultural. I've been reading The Language of the Night by Ursula K. Le Guin, and she has a lot of very interesting things to say about that. I think in general, we don't really understand fantasy, and we don't understand there's a lot we don't understand. That was a long and convoluted and complicated answer to I don't know why. And no one's telling me why certain brains go to fantasy. The
If
end.
we have any neuroscientists in the audience,
Yeah,
hit us up.
exactly.
Let us know what you think is going on.
I've only been asking you to come out of the woodworks for the past like 5 years or so, just wanting to know more about how the brain works. And that is actually very interesting that you studied engineering. Last month, we had on Joff Wu as a guest, and he has an engineering background. I think that's what he does professionally now, and is obviously a huge aspect of the Cosmere community. And we discussed his massive spreadsheet timeline and how he kind of took all of these fantastical elements, these fiction elements, and converted them into a huge
Made
spreadsheet.
it into math.
Yes, exactly. And so when you're saying that, you see that maybe overrepresented where these engineers or people with a STEM background kind of are often really into nerd culture, I think that's a funny link, or just an unexpected link. It might be assumed that the engineering mindset is like all about the real world, only can think of, math and numbers and would hate anything fictional. But as I think is evidenced, and as you are saying anecdotally, that's not really the case.
They're cryptics.
Ooh, they love those lies.
Numbers, but also fiction. Well, you like books so much that you started your own blog/YouTube channel. What inspired you to start sharing your love for books on the internet?
Well, years before I finally started, I had the idea to do it simply because I felt like the people in my real life were tiring of having the conversations with me. So I needed to expand.
Yeah, this is very relatable.
I only had, 3 or 4 core friends reading the stuff I was reading, including my husband. And at some point, it's just like, okay, we've had this conversation a lot, and I know you still have deeper things to say. And I just wanted people who wanted to go as deeply as I did. So it was really just like, I have nowhere to put these thoughts, and I need somewhere to record them.
Yep. Very, very relatable.
I lucked out in a big way of just marrying my nerdiest friend. And then that way we could continue the conversations all the time. But yes, we have far more Cosmere conversations offline than we do have recorded ones. And so, eventually we just got to the point when we were like, we should probably record this. This makes sense that like there might be other people out there who would be interested in learning. And correct me if I'm wrong, you started your YouTube channel in 2020, is that right?
I did. Yeah, I started it in June of 2020, although it had nothing to do with what was going on in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
I had the idea years and years previously, actually. It was just, and I had been working on it actually before everything shut down. I'm just like very methodical. So I was taking months to really line everything up. And it just so happened that everything shut down. And then I was like, well, I'm still going to do it.
Yeah.
But a lot of people decided to just start stuff during that time. So it was kind of like weirdly unlucky at the same time, I feel like.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I feel like you've had a lot of success. You have a very well-known YouTube channel, and it is not only part of the Cosmere community, but you also look at other books and series. I am interested if you have any other social medias, the TikToks or Instagrams, or is YouTube your main focus?
YouTube is my main focus. I do have an Instagram. I started actually, well, this is some Bookborn lore. It might be a little too long, but I actually wanted to do a blog originally. My idea that I had, I think I started forming the idea of Bookborn. Actually, it's always been named Bookborn back in like 2015. And it was going to be a faceless blog. And when I finally, around 2019, thought I was going to pull the trigger, my husband was the one who was like, you can't start a blog in 2019. Like, that's not what anyone's doing. You need to do YouTube. And that was really uncomfortable for me. So I started an Instagram first, actually, just to see like a Bookstagram where I took pictures of books and did reviews. Very quickly after a month, knew it wasn't what I really wanted to do because I had like this long form. I always wanted to do a video essay. It was going to be a blog post, but I had long form ideas that I needed to get off. So I do have an Instagram, but YouTube is what I would consider to be like my main focus. Instagram is really a way to connect with people because I don't have like a Patreon or anything. So it's a way to get messages. I've never been on TikTok in my life. I don't have a Facebook. Like that's it. It's YouTube and Instagram. Don't even have personal accounts of those other things.
That's really fascinating. This is not an aspect that Brooke and I talk about too much on the podcast because it's not, we just talk about the Cosmere and not necessarily like our business or the way we structure things. But I would say that we are each not that interested in social media and would kind of do less if we could. And it has always been a great aspect of a podcast that you can just record it. We're here in our office, and then we do it amongst ourselves and then send it out into the world. And for years, we didn't really even care or try that hard to extend our audience or grow our audience.
Especially with podcasting where there's so much less feedback. Like you upload a video to YouTube and you can immediately see the likes, the views, the comments, etc. But a podcast, you really just like put it out into the world and then you're like, I assume people maybe are listening. Who knows?
Yeah. And even if they're not, we didn't really care because it was just a conversation among ourselves. But, you know, I'm sensing a little bit of hesitancy in the realm of social media for you as well. So maybe let's start with this. Why did you choose YouTube specifically compared to, like, you could have just done writing. I've read your scripts, or at least, you know, you do a YouTube video that has a script.
I feel like the internet has come back around too. Now there's like Substacks and stuff for, you know, long form writing.
So you said that like it was important to have this long form aspect, but there's this hesitancy of like is it having your face out there? Is it part of the, we'll say, negative aspects of the internet? What was kind of like the balance that you were working with and then settling on YouTube as kind of the best medium for you?
Yeah, I wanted my ideas out there and to be able to have a discussion with people. Like, I just really wanted to talk to people. And YouTube is literally 100% because my husband told me to. Mm-hmm. He was like, you cannot make a blog. And then he bought me a camera and he was like, you hate wasting money. And I bought you this camera for Christmas. Now you have to use it. Like, he just really, I had never watched BookTube. He showed me a couple videos and was like, you could do this. I was hesitant. Like, it was very difficult for me to have the idea of my face and voice out there. Very vulnerable, like insecure, like just very difficult to be like, I have to show my face to people. And I just had to get over it. Like I read a Brene Brown book for a book club I was in. And the whole book was like, if you're not vulnerable in your life, like what will you accomplish? And it gave me like the final push to be like, I have to do this scary thing and it might fail and that's okay. But like, if I don't try, then, you know, what am I really doing? And so I just got over it. And, I don't know. TBD if it was a good idea or not.
I guess that would be the follow-up is like, do you think that was a good idea, or does it still come with challenges that you're, you know, after the video is done and you've kind of had it out there, you're like, nah, that wasn't really worth it. I
mean, there's always a trade-off, you know, like for sure. I'm sure that you get commenters who are, you know, in bad faith or just annoying or whatever, but hopefully the ability to connect with other people and like make those connections, have those conversations, that is your sort of, you know, driving reason behind creating the channel. Hopefully that is outweighing any of the negatives that may come along with it.
Oh, for sure. Like the community has been incredible. I have met so many amazing people and I love it. Like I love the community. Is it sometimes still hard to like see my face and hear my voice? Yes. And some weeks when I watch the video and it's just like, it is hard to see my face. Like it's hard. But the content wise and community wise, it's been 100% worth it.
That's lovely to hear. I mean, I am, as I said, very hesitant about social media in general, or just kind of the negative feedback loop that is possible when something becomes more popular, your YouTube channel grows, more people are exposed to it, but then that brings out like a negative subsection that kind of just like always exists. Whatever the fandom is, whatever the YouTuber is, whatever the podcast is, it always kind of comes with this, we'll say 1%, maybe 5%, that's just like always there and always a little bit negative.
I know we really loved something that you said in one of your panels at Nexus about like the worst commenters are the pronunciation people. And I just like looked at him and I was like, oh God, yes, the pronunciation people, they will come for you.
Yeah, I think, you know, the funny thing is there is a funny way to do a pronunciation comment and a non-funny way. Mm-hmm. And it is a fine line because I have definitely gotten comments that make me laugh and I know are in good faith and good fun. Yeah. I think the biggest thing is like, if I have made this giant video that has taken a lot of effort and you have admitted is like good fandom content or like is contributing to the fandom. And your only comment is about how I pronounce something. Why did you make the comment? Like, what was the purpose? And it just gets exhausting. Like, some people are so intense about it. And it's just like, for what?
Yeah.
For what is...
For what?
It's a good question for a lot of the internet. So let's just go right to that very, very controversial subject of pronunciation. I have a bunch. I have a bunch of things that I say that don't make any sense, and people come at me in a pronunciation. You know, they're correcting me
in different ways. Like you said, sometimes people are, you know, kind of funny and in good faith, and just like, oh, haha, you like say this one thing kind of weird, and you're like, yeah, I do. Like, whatever. We're all here saying fictional words, so.
But in that spirit, either good faith or bad faith, what do you think is the number one pronunciation issue that for the Cosmere, not like outside of the Cosmere, but just like, what's the one that kind of keeps coming back up? For me, I'm very adamant that the name Sazed from Mistborn rhymes with dazed and is not how the audiobook says it.
2 syllables.
Yeah, exactly, with 2 syllables. And people hate that. And it's just like, anytime I say his name, I just like shift it subtly to harmony, and it's much easier now. But I'm just curious if there's one that you know will just like, it always triggers that particular type of person out there.
I mean, I'm on record that I am Jasna with a hard J and I do not care. So that one doesn't even bother me because people know. Like, I've told them, like, I literally don't care. I think the problem is I see names on my page sometimes as just a shape.
Yeah.
And when I am saying them online, it's sometimes a discovery for me. I'm like, I just didn't ever try to say that word out loud. And here it is. And I actually have had a hard time pronouncing words since I was very young. There's actually a lot of family jokes about the ways I pronounced words because I read them first.
Yes.
Like, I was such a big reader that I read them and didn't know how to say them. And that has followed me.
Yeah, it's totally a book nerd peril. My youngest brother is the same. He's almost 30, and like to this day, he has a handful of words that he just says, and we're all like, what? And he's like, I only read it for like 20 years. What do you want me to do?
It's like the funny thing of a book reader where like I can use the word correctly in a sentence. I have figured out what it means, but I don't have any concept. And I just always feel like with names don't follow regular reading conventions.
Very true.
Totally.
And so I don't understand why people are so angry about it. And I do think this is actually an internet phenomenon because I used to talk about books and Sanderson books regularly in my daily life before I ever got on the internet, and nobody ever corrected me. They might say it differently and they would just say it the way they said it in conversation, and we both knew who we were talking about, and we just moved on. And like, so when I got on the internet, it was actually really shocking because that's not how people behave in real life.
Definitely.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's totally possible to have a conversation with someone about a book and you're pronouncing things different ways, but like you both know what you mean. And so just get on with it. Have the conversation.
Like, Tyler, if we were having a conversation and I didn't know you and you said Sazed, I would know exactly who you meant, even though I personally say Sazed, and I would not comment on it. Like, it would just be, oh, Sazed. Like, I know who he's talking about.
Yeah.
Like, and that would be the passing thought, maybe, if I thought about it at all. I think the biggest thing is my viewers are annoyed is that I don't care. Like, I literally don't care. Like, I don't care.
Well, welcome to a safe space of we don't care, because that's a defining trait over here on the podcast.
I'll call myself out on probably my most controversial pronunciation.
Give it to us.
Which is the way that we say the magic system that Sazed uses.
Oh, okay.
We say it Farukami, which is, I think is, quite wrong, but it's the only way I could figure out how to pronounce it the first time I read it, and I just can't make Farukami sound right to me.
But like, that's so close. See, like, again, to me, that wouldn't even register. Like, if I'm listening and you say that, I wouldn't think, wow, she said it. I'd be like, oh yeah, Farukami. Like, every once in a while, someone will correct me, and the way that they correct me is easier than how I say it, and so I will adopt it.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And so like you're like, oh, that actually, the way you just said that actually sounds better.
It's better, yeah.
But it has to be me being like, oh, that actually is better. Okay, I will adopt that.
Yeah.
But it has nothing to do with whether it's correct or not.
Yeah.
So like for you, I get it. You're like, I can't get Furukami to sound right. Like, you keep saying it. How do you say it?
Furukami.
Or Furukami. Like, why not?
Yeah.
It's a made up word.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's a U right there in the middle. We just say that U real hard.
Maybe you find this too, Bookborn, but I also sometimes will like adopt a pronunciation in my head, like just for fun, sort of, just to like make my mental landscape like more interesting as I'm reading. Like the original holder of Odium, originally when we find out his name, I didn't like that it rhymed with the planet Braze. We already had a Braze, and I was like, well, that's boring if I have Raze and Braze. So like, let me just, how else can I say this that like would be more entertaining to me while I'm reading? And so I decided that it has like a German pronunciation, and I say it Raisa.
But see, like, you put more thought than I ever do. Like, I literally, it is not a thought process. I look at the name, and the first thing that comes to my mind, that is now their name. And like some things like ad nauseum, which I'm getting better at. Again, I never said that word out loud until I was on a video, and I thought, I've never considered how to say that. It is a jumble of words to me because it was too long. At some point, when a word is that long with that many letters, it's just like, okay, I see ADO and I know what you're talking about. And then I move on.
Totally.
The only thing that's helped me with that is just deciding that when Brandon starts a name with the letter A, he really wants you to say A. I just Adolin, Adonalcium, AAA. And I just like overemphasize. That seems to be what the audiobook narrator, Michael Kramer and Kate Redding, that seems to be the way they pronounce their A names. And so that's how I recognize like, oh, the correct version is not what I say, but it's with a hard A, basically. I think this debate about pronunciation is, for us, a lot of fun. And mainly when people come at us, it is silly and, you know, has that lighthearted nature that people like to rib on us when we are mispronouncing things or pronouncing things. But I also know that there is a difficulty that comes with a female and a femme-presenting female on the internet who is the recipient of this attention, positive and negative. And I'm wondering how you handle that, aspect. As we said, we kind of like retreat from all of it. Like we don't want to deal with a lot of those things. And so we pull back almost as much as we can. And you are in a very different position when, as you said, your face is out there. And so how do you deal with that particular struggle as a creator and a female creator on the internet?
Yeah, it's tough sometimes. I have been in male spaces a lot of my life as like a math person in high school. And then as an engineer, my major was only like 10% female. And then in my career afterwards. So I already actually had a sense like I am, and my hobbies, that, you know, video games and fantasy tended to skew more male where I was anyway. And so I already had that thought that that was going to be an issue. And so I was a little prepared for it. It's frustrating to be treated differently, but not be able to prove it, but like very clearly be treated differently than my male counterparts. And my husband just gets to hear me being angry about it sometimes, as well as some of my creator friends. Like I have some great female creator friends and we talk about it. But also one of the things though that I'd like to say a bright spot is that in a fantasy booktube, adult fantasy booktube space, which is a lot of male creators, it's just like the best male creators, the best experiences. The male creators are just allies constantly without being asked or told. I couldn't believe how they have come to my aid and support without ever talking to them about it. I would in the early days, particularly before I even knew them, I would see some of these male creators in my comments calling people out without even telling me that they were doing that or reaching out to me. And that made the space so wonderful to be like, these creators are not the commenters and they want me here. And I always want to shout that out because it really is a problem within the comments and it has not been a problem with any of the other creators, which I think speaks a lot to the type of people who are in the book space and is definitely makes it it makes it worthwhile. But is it frustrating? Yes. It is very frustrating, especially because sexism isn't something that's super easy to point to and prove. It is often just a general feeling and a general notice of trends. And that's tough when you can't be like, here's proof.
Yes, definitely. And I think that hearing that those creators like were creating that space, even with, it wasn't like to get your attention or to, like build a friendship with you, like, hey, I was out defending you, white knighting or anything like that. It was just legitimately being a nice person and seeing something and calling it out. I would echo that just like all of the people that we meet at Dragonsteel Nexus or other events around Brandon Sanderson, it's always so nice to form a deeper connection because the people are they're kind, they're very kind. And to feel that kindness, whether it's online or in person, is so nice. Like that's probably the best aspect of being a creator, is having this environment and these groups of people where you can feel that kindness and share that kindness and like see it on display. So it is very important to call that out rather than just like always be pointing out the negative aspects. There's good aspects as well.
Do you find that it's different in different fandoms? Like if you make a video about one series, do you see that the sort of tenor of the comments is different versus making a video about a different series?
No, not particularly. I think if I am negative about a series, that is when it comes out a lot. When I am positive about a series, it doesn't come out in the same ways. It might come out about characters or things like that, but not as directed towards me. I think the biggest difference I notice is there have been a couple of times where me and a male creator have said the same thing about like a sexist character in a book.
Mm-hmm.
And the comment difference of a man saying this seems sexist is treated much nicer. Like, oh, you're right. I didn't notice that. I didn't agree. But if I say that same thing, shouldn't be here. These books aren't for you. You are too sensitive. You are this. And in fact, I actually talked to a specific creator when we made the same video, and he was like, I could not believe that we said the same thing, and the tone of your comments are so different. And that's where I see it the most. But I have a huge affection for the fandoms. Even when some of the fandoms treat me poorly, I know that the majority of them aren't. And I don't like when my fandoms are judged by the worst of our kind. And so I try my hardest to separate those people from the fandoms at large.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that there is this show now that it's pretty old. I'm dating myself here, but there was a HBO show called John Adams about the early presidents. And one of the jokes that John Adams made, remarking on when George Washington was walking around a party, was that he's the tallest man in the room, so he's going to end up leading something sometime. And I've noticed that outside of just sexism, physical size changes people's behavior. Like I am slightly larger than average for males, which means for humans, I'm slightly larger than average. And just the difference in like how a person will treat me versus how they'll treat the 5'6" man standing next to me is different. And then that difference is obviously even greater when it comes to between male and female. And so I'm always trying to be aware of that. And I am confused mainly when people don't have that understanding that like the world is different and reacts differently to different people. Cause I see it on display so often, and to be out there on the internet, just being like, no, I have perfect thoughts and everything that I'm saying is correct, is mystifying to me. But I also think it is a great opportunity for empathy, I guess, as you were saying, like don't judge the entire fandom by the worst actors. And yes, it is unfortunate. I personally am sorry. I'm sorry that anybody has to deal with the kind of like negative aspects out there. It's always so frustrating, especially when we are, at least for the Cosmere fandom, we're following a group of books where the diversity of experience, the diversity of opinion, and what's on display on the page is often so directly about empathy and having empathy for other people. It makes me wonder kind of what you thought generally about this first half of Stormlight Archive, which people have joked is like someone with a disability gets superpowers. Someone struggling with a mental or physical disability is filled and made whole by the spren bond and kind of like those bonds that bring people together. So let's transition a little bit and just kind of talk about this most recent book, Wind and Truth. We saw earlier this year you were talking a lot about your rather positive views about Wind and Truth. I think you gave it a 9 out of 10 or 4.5 out of 5, right? So how do you feel like that aspect of empathy and understanding others was on display in Stormlight Archive and just kind of like Wind and Truth in general?
I mean, it's just a main tenet of Wind and Truth in general, from Kaladin and Shallan's first stories, even Dalinar's first stories about how to change and become better and take the next step. And, the things you struggle with don't define you. And I mean, obviously Kaladin's journey with depression and Shallan's with her childhood trauma and how that's manifested for her. And then Dalinar with his very dark past and how he decided to become a better person and try to change. It's all about that core tenet, which is, I think, why Stormlight spoke to so many people. In Wind and Truth, it's really the culmination of all of those things, right? It's the culmination of where that led us. And in my opinion, where every character ends up is like a very satisfying end for that journey for them.
I'd agree. I thought that Wind and Truth did kind of take our characters to logical conclusions or just like a good conclusion. Some still, very open-ended, Shallan being more open-ended, Dalinar being very not open-ended, a closed book on Dalinar for the most part. But the journey was worth it and worthwhile for us as readers to experience. And I'd agree. I think that is part of what so many people attach to when it came to Stormlight Archive, is just like seeing a hypocrite is just a man in the process of changing. I think we all recognize that we are changing over time and that the views we had in the past are likely different from the views that we have now and will be different in the future. And so maybe there's a question right there. What do you think is your biggest change in opinion from Way of Kings to Wind and Truth, either about a character or the overall journey?
That's a tough question. I guess what's coming to mind right now is Seth, because he was such a big part of Wind and Truth. I think he was always a conflicted character. I just didn't find him someone I was naturally attracted to as a in terms of characterization. Like, I wasn't the person who was like, oh yeah, I just like need a ton more Seth. And hearing his background was very different kind of than I expected. I knew he would be a rule follower, but hearing how he internalized the rules that his family was growing him up with, even though they actually didn't necessarily really believe them,
exactly,
was such an interesting take on religion in a book that already takes a lot of different ideas about religion. I thought it was a very real and particular element of that. And so I think Seth's flashbacks actually did really change my vision of his journey. And I'd be very interested on how his journey is in a reread after Wind and Truth.
Yeah, I completely agree. I had a very similar experience where Zeth was never really a character that I was like super curious about. And Wind and Truth obviously gives us so much more perspective on his character, which in some ways made him more interesting to me. And then in some ways just emphasized how much I was like, I do not understand you. Like, we have very different brains, and I don't know how you are the way you are, but I respect it to an extent. I think another one for me was Teravangian's trajectory. How in the first few books, he's really set up as such an empathetic villain where maybe you don't agree with everything that he is doing, but you at least kind of understand that he does have a reasoning behind it, and it seems that he is trying to do things for good, for what he thinks is good, and is like at least trying to be what he thinks is a good person. And then in Wind and Truth, I think that whole illusion is completely shattered for himself as well as for the audience, he really drops the whole facade and just commits to like, actually, no, the thing underneath all the things that I've been doing is just, I want to be the one to do it. I want to be the one in power. And that was kind of a crazy shift for me to see.
That's so funny to hear you say that, because I feel like that has been evident since like Words of Radiance. I feel like his one of my favorite things about Taravangian in Wind and Truth is how much it is consistent with his behavior in the rest of the novels. Like thinking about how he's taking these people in a hospital and purposely letting them die because it is for the greater good to hear their death rattles and to make a deal with with Wraith about, well, at least save my city. I think that's what makes him such a compelling character. Like, I agree with you. Like, I think his actions in Wind and Truth are at like a step up because now he holds Odium. And it was incredible to see that. But I think an underrated part of his character is how Brandon has been building that since literally book one, for like this natural, like, yeah, he has gained more power. He is doing the same things, but on an even grander scale.
I think one of the things that's so interesting about Taravangian is this concept of the divided mind, how he was purposefully, by cultivation, kind of given these two warring sides of his mind, the empathetic, or the supremely empathetic, and then the supremely intelligent. And then the dangerous part was that like fourth interlude where he made the switch permanently, where it seemed like the power of Odium and his divided minds, those three things kind of locked in. And then going forward, I was like, oh, now he's full villain. And it was after that you have the destruction of Kharbranth, and clearly like the battle for the greater Cosmere, torturing Dalinar. Like everything seemed to lock in for him. And so as an earlier character, I was kind of like debating giving him the benefit of the doubt, but as you are saying, it was always right there on the page. Like, you probably shouldn't be giving the benefit of the doubt to the person who is collecting people to like watch them die or encourage their death, to set up their deaths for the greater good. I'm not a big fan of greater goods, whether they be Taravangian or Thanos, and am, amazed at the transformation that we saw on the page for Stormlight Archive. And it's certainly terrifying now that we have Retribution, the only other double shard besides Harmony in the Cosmere. And maybe we can do that. Do you have any predictions for the back half of Stormlight Archive based on what we have learned? This was actually a question we got from our patron Tarmac Worm. You can join us over on Patreon. It's super awesome. But what do you think about that, Bookborn? Any predictions for the future on any characters, or just like grander theories in the Cosmere?
Well, I'm sorry, Tarmac Worm. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you did.
I'm sorry to say, I feel like I am more of an analyzer than a predictor. I've never been a huge predictor. But one thing I thought after Wind and Truth was, originally because of Sunlit Man, I thought Kaladin would disappear essentially maybe after book 5. I didn't think he was going to die, but I thought he'd play a very small role in the back half. I changed my mind. Obviously, as a herald, he won't play the same role, but I expect him to be more present than I originally expected. Like, that is my prediction. He will be present in the back half in a way I wasn't expecting. I also feel like one of the most interesting things, we have a 10-year gap.
Yes.
And how do you manage a 10-year gap where people have to change a lot and circumstances need to change in 10 years, but that your readers will also not want to miss out on some things that are happening? And the one for me there is a pregnant Shallan stuck in Shadesmar.
Yes.
I feel like if at the end of 10 years she's still in Shadesmar, that is not enough movement for 10 years. To me, she has to be out of Shadesmar. But will readers be frustrated that they don't see it? Like, I feel like her and Adeline will have to reunite off screen.
Exactly.
Because 10 years doesn't make sense to me otherwise. So is it going to be at the reunification point where like Adeline has only talked to his child via Sion? Like,
Yeah, I completely agree. That was maybe my biggest question mark when I finished Wind and Truth, was I have so many questions about Shallan's storyline. Because at first I thought, okay, she's in Shadesmar. She's kind of already been set up to be this Cosmere scholar and to sort of go off and learn more about the different planets, etc. And I had a question about how is she going to do this when she's married to Adolin? Like, she can't just leave him behind. And then there was the extra wrinkle of like, I guess she's pregnant now. So like, is she gonna go off and fulfill her sort of projected destiny of becoming a Cosmere scholar? Is she gonna go back and then like not fulfill that path but then have this baby? I don't know. I'm very curious to see where she goes because there's so many different ways she could go.
Yeah, I think she's set up to be a primary world hopper. That's all I wanted to say. Like, she's a primary world hopper. I just don't think it makes sense. If the next book was in 2 years, I'd expect Shalon to still be in Shadesmar. 10 years, no way. So then it's like, okay, did she get out of Shadesmar, but she can't get back to Roshar? Is the time dilation going to take effect? There's a lot of questions. I feel like her and Adolin will have to have some sort of reunification. I don't see her being a world hopper with her child without Adolin.
Right.
So I don't know, but I don't really necessarily see Adolin being a world hopper. So I don't know. He would like the fashions, though. He'd like the fashions.
Oh man, he'd have the best combination of clothing. Like he would just pull a little bit from each culture.
He would
put them
be
all
so
together.
inspired.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Maybe he should be a world hopper. We're rewriting. Fan fiction is now in session. I think that I'm just going to put this out there. I know that there's the 1 or 2 lines that hints at Shalon's pregnancy. I still think that that's Brandon's, I can do this if I want to, but I don't necessarily have to. A lot of people are just like very convinced and they're trying to figure out like, how does Shalon do this with a baby? I'm not 100% convinced that she's going to have a baby at all. Like it could be a thing. Yes.
You think he's just not going to follow up on
I think
line?
He wants that plot line as a possibility, but I am not convinced because as both of you are talking about, it's really difficult to imagine circumstances where you have a 10-year-old who's never left Shadesmar, never met his father. Shalon is important for Roshar, but is also a primary world hopper or potentially a primary world hopper. Like, how does all of those things work out? I don't know. I don't have an answer. And therefore, I at least have the possibility of just like, nah. Brandon's just, no, thank you. I thought about it. I put some hints in there if I wanted to go down that route, but maybe it won't happen at all. Bookborn hates this idea. She's saying this is definitely going to happen.
No, because Brandon is a follow through. Like
Yeah.
he doesn't put that and not follow through. And especially because Brandon has everything so planned out, clearly this child will be very important in the second half. This is a clear like move on to the second gen, very like a la First Law. I don't know if you guys are First Law fans, but you get into the second half and it is all about the next gen. And what do you mean it doesn't sound interesting to have a 10-year-old who's never left Shadesmar? That sounds like prime Brandon characterization right there, is to take a child who has only grown up in a Spren city and is now the arbiter of Spren and people and finishes up the storyline of making Spren into the physical realm. I think it's for sure happening.
Yeah, okay, this is great. But these are wonderful predictions. See, I just tricked you into making a prediction. That's really what was going on.
Okay, nice. Touche.
I think that the concept is at least somewhat similar to what we saw on display with Gavinor, who is stuck in the spiritual realm for 20 years and, quote unquote, raised by Odium. The question that I would have is, how does a person who is a physical being, a real person, not a cognitive shadow or anything else, spiritual shenanigans, how does that person react or not react correctly if they are never in the physical realm? Does that make sense? Or am I sounding crazy?
Are you just meaning like, are they going to, they're like not socialized sort of?
Okay, yes. Basically, if they were a little puppy, then I would consider it like you're not socializing that dog enough. You're not taking them out to explore. They're not seeing enough little sights. This is a child and is different. There's obviously places, cities, and people and Spren within Shadesmar.
Yeah, that's what would make it interesting, would be like, how does this person take on aspects of Spren culture and how would they behave differently, think differently by being raised in this different place with different people.
Certainly agree. Like there's lots of opportunities. I'm wondering if there's a downside. I don't know. Maybe Isles of the Emberdark will actually give us some more insight on what it's like to be a resident of Shadesmar and or the Emberdark, the cognitive realm. Because yeah, we've only kind of seen people who travel through Shadesmar rather than an entity living in the cognitive realm who is not of the cognitive realm.
I mean, it happens a lot because there's Silverlight where there's an
Ayatil,
entire...
right? Isn't Ayatil
Yes,
born in Silverlight?
correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, so there's an entire university there where people are living, and then there's also the Eyrie who are building. We like don't see how that city sort of plays out, but they are building their own fortress so that they can live there. So it's not an isolated circumstance.
I guess I'm just worried. I'm worried about this potential child who's only living in the cognitive realm. Certainly, you know, not seeing his father is going to have some downsides. There's some better father-child relationships on display in Stormlight Archive. I'm still really sad that Adolin and Dalinar don't actually have a moment of reconciliation, and instead it's just like a spiritual realm pulse that Dalinar sends out before he dies. I think it's a bummer, and I'm thinking it's going to be a bummer if he also doesn't get to see his kid for 10 years. But it's going to be strange, I think, to come back after 10 years. How have these characters progressed? What things have happened on screen versus off screen? And then how do we get back involved with the characters that we love? And it'll be interesting, which is kind of why I'm excited that Brandon's like going to a different world. Ghostbloods and Mistborn Era 3 being the primary example.
Isn't there a perfect opportunity here, though, with Adolin and Dalinar to continue their story, as Adolin has to reckon with being a not by choice absent father to his child? Isn't there this reconciliation where Adolin was the favored child in his youth, and then Dalinar and Adolin had this falling out as Dalinar and Renarin try to heal their relationship, and how he can maybe have sympathy and empathy for his father once he realizes the position he is put in his own fatherhood? Now, that's, again, difficult with a 10-year gap, but I think we could still see evidences of that, and it seems like something Brandon would be interested in exploring.
Yeah, that's a really great point in noting how those themes could potentially tie together. And maybe it is that we get some flashbacks in the back half and like see parts of this 10-year gap to kind of put in context where they are now.
I certainly think flashbacks to the gap period makes sense and could help fill in a lot of these moments. So they don't technically happen off screen. They just happen in the flashbacks, which are to us in the future, just to have fun with time there. Let's go to another crazy aspect of Wind and Truth, which is this labeled fourth moon underneath the shattered plains. This was probably one of the things that was like most surprising, or like the biggest bit of lore that I was exposed to.
It blew my mind. After like reading about this fourth moon situation, I just like put the book down and I didn't pick it up again for like 3 hours. I was just like, what is happening?
Do you have any initial thoughts on the fourth moon, what it means, its connection to Braze, or maybe some speculation about if it's similar to Canticle and kind of what's going on there with the core of that planet?
No. When I finished, I finished at 5 a.m. at Dragonsteel reading this book the day it came out. Because I had gotten an early copy. So I was like trying to finish it and I didn't finish that morning. And I went to lunch with Eric from the 17th Shard that day. And I was like, here's the thing, Eric, we need to talk. And this was the thing I wanted to talk to him about. And we both had no idea. Like, we were both like, I don't know. So I really don't know. I am convinced it has something to do with god metals. Like, I'm so convinced because of the nature of where it was. And because of something that Brandon said in the Dragonsteel spoiler stream when someone asked about Krem and god metals, and he was kind of like, well, I don't know. And let me tell you, as someone who had read like 75% of the book at the point of that spoiler stream, he was dropping so many hints for Wind and Truth. I was sitting there dying because obviously no one else had read it. And I was like, I can't believe he's saying this stuff. Like, that happens in Wind and Truth, and that happens, and that happens. So it's made me rethink some of the stuff he said in that spoiler stream as being sneaky. And so That is why I'm convinced, for no other reason, that has something to do with god metals. Now, do I know enough about god metals to make this like a good theory? No, but I'm going with it.
I think that's a great place to start. And certainly that stream, and actually you mentioned this. So you did an episode, your Wind and Truth predictions with a group of other Cosmere creators. And when you said that, Brandon was like dropping extra hints. And that moment specifically with the question was, there's a metallic taste in the rain, and the creme, is that because that metallic taste is caused by a god metal? And that's where Brandon, like, did his Brandon thing where he kind of gets all coy,
Brandon.
we'll say. Yes. But I went back and listened to that moment, trying to think about it with the new knowledge that we have from Wind and Truth and this fourth moon potential. And I think a god metal is a great example, but then I get so worried about like what's going to happen if you break the fundamental ecology of Rashar by destroying the god of honor. Is the creme still filled with that metallic taste? Does that metallic taste go away because there's no more god metal?
Well, there's still a god metal. It's just retribution metal instead of honor metal.
And do you think that is fully replacing wherever?
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but unless it's all used up, an old god metal can still exist until it's used up, right?
Yes,
because
correct.
when harmony became harmony, there technically could still be
ATM?
the god metal. Yeah, ATM. I mean, a lot of the ATM was used up. So I think it wouldn't necessarily mean that it couldn't be Honor's god metal. It's just that Honor's god metal could no longer be being created.
Right. Any like new metal that's created would be retribution, but any existing Tanavastium would stay the same. Like you would still be able to mine it or whatever. It's not like the honor blades suddenly disappear.
Vanish.
Yeah.
Of course, that's kind of the best example of Tanavastium on display are those honor blades, and certainly they don't vanish with the destruction of honor or the...
Yeah, and I don't think that they suddenly change to be retributionium.
I like it. I like that you were hesitant around the word a couple of times and then you finally dove in.
Just dive in.
That's perfect. Yeah, I think we're going to get a lot more about the way that metals are interacting. Kind of just like anytime that metals are introduced on Rashar, my mind is sending out huge signals because I'm like, metals are important on Scadrial, and the fabrials that they are using and making on Rashar are influencing the investiture in the same way that metals on Scadrial are working as well. So you have like iron and steel used for pushing and pulling in fabrials. And so once you have just any mention of metal, I'm kind of wondering how that's going to interact and how that's going to continually interact as we go forward. But it's a lot of speculation and we don't have answers here. We just have more and more questions.
Yeah, lots of questions.
This has nothing really to do with what you just said. Are the god metals always named after the holder or after the shard? Because ATM is...
Yeah, it should be after the vessel. But
right? So it's really Taravangium, not
Taravangium.
Ooh, nice. Yeah. This is fun.
Taravangium. Yeah, that's what it is.
Does not roll off the tongue, and I would recommend something else. Brandon, if you're listening.
Well,
Harmony.
Sazed decided that he liked harmonium better than Sazedium, and so it's called harmonium. So maybe Taravangian will do the same.
Exactly. Yeah, everyone has a
choice.
These
are the important questions that everyone is here for, clearly.
Yes.
You let us know, fans out there, what is the new god metal of retribution called? Pronunciation is not judged, so you can pronounce it however you would like, but hit us up with your answers to that question. What about this? There's a conflict within the fandom about the Cosmere becoming maybe too inaccessible to the people who are not obsessive. I would say I am obsessive. I'm guessing Brooke would also qualify herself as obsessive, but it also has to simultaneously kind of appeal to those obsessive fans that are out there, but it can't be too boring or too spelled out, too direct. And there's this kind of like balance that is struck where do you maybe place yourself on that bell curve? And then how do you feel like Brandon is writing to the super fans versus what I would just call a normal reader?
I clearly put myself in with the super fans. I know way too much, and that's fine. I know way too much about a lot of stuff. That's, the Elsecaller life. But I just think it's silly. I think that the super fans underestimate how an average reader can understand things in fantasy. I think it's so overblown. I think the whole conversation is quite silly and is influencing people not to pick up Sanderson's work for a completely made up reason. You can read just Stormlight and all the information you need is in there to make the story 100% understandable. I just think very few people are actually reading Sanderson just for the Easter eggs. I'm sure there's some people out there. I don't think they're really necessary. Now, could it eventually get too unwieldy? Yes. I'm not claiming it could never get there. But as of the, 35 published Cosmere books we have right now, I easily maintain that you could just read Mistborn, just read Stormlight Archive, just read the secret projects, and you would not need any other information than what is contained within them. And I will die by my sword on that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I saw you saying similar things about the sort of debate about reading order as well. And this has also always been my thought in the whole reading order debate. Like, we didn't even go to that panel because I was just like, this is dumb. There doesn't need to be a reading order. Like, why is there a panel about this? Because I think you're totally right. People, like, we need to give readers more credit for being able to pick up on the things that are important and then trust them to make their own decisions about whether or not they want to follow those Easter eggs, down the path. If they want to, they can. The path is open. And if not, the books function perfectly well on their own, and we all have our own place in our heart for the order that we first read the Cosmere that feels right to us. But I think we have done a few other book clubs with our patrons reading different fantasy series, and there are a lot of fantasy series that put a ton of kind of flavor, like world building flavor in the book that is never explained, never explored. And people read those books and it's fine. They don't have the answers and we all survive. It's okay. And that's exactly the way that a Cosmere book would read to someone who is not going down all the rabbit holes. The only difference is that if you want to go down the rabbit hole, there's a long rabbit hole for you to go down.
Completely agree. First of all, Tyler and Brooke, you should have come because I was fighting for my life. I moderated that panel.
Oh, no.
And we could have had your guys' viewpoints there supporting me, my lone voice. No, I think you're totally right. Do people forget fantasy, or are you just not reading fantasy anymore? Like, that is literally a hallmark of fantasy. And the example I always use is Malazan, which is literally known for that. And it is one of the most famous fantasy series. So it's silly.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation that I think Brandon is in with this kind of group of super fans who are looking for every word, or they're reading all of his word of Brandon's, talking about his spoiler stream that he did at Dragonsteel Nexus. That's not what a normal reader is going to do. And at the same time, he has to be writing for that normal reader and also appealing to the growing number of super fans or obsessive fans. And it is a situation that I think is maybe unique. I don't think that there's a lot of evidence, for example, that J.R.R. Tolkien needed to have this dual writing setup of appealing to both groups of people. He was mainly just doing what he wanted to do. And then if it gets out there, it gets out there. And he created some of the extra works in those series, the Silmarillion and the appendices, to add some extra content. But Brandon is kind of doing it all in the text, in the books that he is writing. And I wonder if there will be a shift or a spot where it does get too out of a normal reader's ability to follow along. I would agree. We're 35 books in, and I still have no problem saying read Mistborn. It's fine. And people do, and they don't need to go any deeper. But Yeah, at a certain point, I feel like there might be a breaking point, and maybe that's what people are worried about. That like in the future, there could be something. Just to give, the people who are worried, give some credit, because I think it's at least a fear that could be out there. But for the most part, I think us here are all on the same page, that it doesn't really matter all that much.
I think that's an understandable fear, but and I'm sure it's something that Brandon himself has to like juggle and be mindful of. I don't think it's the easiest way to write a book, but I also am not really concerned about it at all. And I think of Tamara Pierce's work with all of her Tortall series that are all like, there's a lot of crossover characters. There's a lot of history that if you read all of the books, like you'll get, and then there are sort of Easter eggs where you see another character that you read an entire series about that, maybe just makes an appearance or whatnot. But it doesn't ruin the experience of reading if you don't have that background. It doesn't, it's not a detraction. It's only an addition for the people who have read everything. And I think that the Cosmere absolutely can be that as well.
Yeah, I just am also not concerned about it. I think if anything, it won't happen in Stormlight. I think Stormlight will be a contained book. I think there is a chance he could write a book or series that is aimed at super fans.
Yeah.
Like its own thing. Like maybe Dragonsteel will be like, hey, Dragonsteel's not the book you give new people, but that's okay because it's a standalone and, whatever. But even that, I think is a little unlikely. I just think that Brandon knows how to make a story work. And my favorite example right now is that my dad read Sunlit Man without having read a single Stormlight book. And he read it and was like, yeah, that book was really good. And it was like, everyone was freaking out about all of this context you needed. And it was just like, he didn't need it. It was just perfectly fine. And so I have a hard time seeing any of Brandon's books unless he purposely wants to write something that is like, here is your culmination if you have not seen anything else. But I think he's talented enough to pull it off. Will he? That's a question we can't answer till we see it. But I just don't anticipate it being like a huge issue.
Yeah, I think that reading Sunlit Man without any other context, that's an awesome decision. I would love to just like be in the mind of someone who had no other context and just picked up Sunlit Man.
This is full Cosmere spoilers?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. Yeah, I asked my dad specifically about like, well, what did you think when this character Kaladin showed up? And he was like, well, clearly it was just his old commander. Like clearly it was just someone he looked up to. And then that was it. And it was like, yeah, I guess you didn't need any more information. Yeah. It was so crazy. Like that was such a funny thing for him to be like, he understood completely. Like there was no context he didn't have. He just told me like, I think there was stuff about magic I didn't quite understand, but I understood the story, so it didn't matter. But like, even if my dad read the whole thing, he is not someone who could hold Cosmere info. Like he is just not that kind of reader. Like he wouldn't anyway. So like, I just don't think it matters.
Yeah. My mom read Tress of the Emerald Sea, and she has read a couple other Cosmere books, but she absolutely, doesn't know anything about the interconnectedness or whatnot. And so I gave it to her and I was like, I really loved this book. I think you'll like it too. I don't know how you'll feel about like the ending, but it's really good. Give it a try. It's so hard for us as like super fans to have any kind of context for like, how will this read to someone who doesn't know anything? But same thing. She was just like, yeah, I loved it. No problem. Like the ending wasn't confusing. It's magic, so you just kind of like, oh yeah, cool, okay, it's like a magic computer or whatever, a spaceship, okay, whatever. Totally loved it, and yeah, no problems at all.
I've given Tress to a lot of people as their first Sanderson. My dad also loved Tress. He just got excited about the Kickstarter because it made so much money.
Yeah.
And he had never read a Sanderson book, and he was just like, I just want to back this because it seems so exciting, and you guys like Sanderson. So he read all of this. He just read all the Kickstarter books.
That's adorable.
All the secret projects. Tress was his favorite. He was obsessed with Tress. The only book actually surprisingly was Yumi. He liked Yumi, but that was the one book he said the magic at the end got a little confusing for him.
Yeah.
Not having other context.
That makes sense.
That was kind of surprising. But like Tress and Sunlight, I mean, he still liked Yumi. He was just like, it was all great. Like I totally agree with you. It's, it's magic. People don't need an explanation.
Yeah.
Yeah, Yumi most directly deals with cognitive shadows, and we've spent many an hour talking about the complexity of those. And so I think yeah, that one makes sense, is like struggling with compared to trust, which I agree. I've also given to people is just read this book. Like, this is a fine book. You don't need to know anything else about the Cosmere or anything greater. I would love to reference back a video that you made earlier this year about the lives of Locke Lamora, because that's another one of my favorite, we'll say, books. I can't say series because it's not necessarily done. But you read that one recently and enjoyed it. But you also said, maybe similar to Wind and Truth, that the beginning of the book, maybe like the first 200 pages or 300 pages, was not your favorite. And then it picked up and kind of like by the end, you really enjoyed it. So I have this question. What's like the best pitch you would give someone for continuing a story that hasn't gripped them in the first 200 pages?
First, an uncompleted series can be your favorite series. A Song of Ice and Fire is for sure my top 2 favorite fantasy series. It does not matter if it's not finished. So you boldly claim that Locke Lamora is your favorite series, and you need to just own it. It's okay. That's not what you asked, though. This is going to just depend on reader, honestly. I don't think I would that hard convince someone. I am just not a quitter. I force myself to finish every book, whether it is good for me or not. I have, I never DNF or do not finish a book. I force myself through, and for good or ill. I just think that sometimes a book needs to cook a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case of Locke Lamora, it did. It worked for me once it cooked a little bit. I think my pitch, though, for individuals is you will become a better reader if you force yourself through some tough spots.
Oh, certainly.
I was birthed in the fires of Wheel of Time, and
a very long series, yeah.
Man, if some of those books in the middle weren't a little tough. But when I finished, I thought I'm a better reader because I allowed myself to get through some boring parts. And so, a book sometimes will bore me and it might take me a little longer. I do think there's a culture right now of the more books you finish, the better. And sometimes a good book is just going to take a month. And it's hard, like particularly, I don't know how you guys feel since you're mostly Cosmere, but like as a content creator, I do sometimes feel the pull where like taking a month to read a book is not good for business.
Yeah.
But sometimes I need to take a month to read a book, and I don't regret that. Sometimes I just push through a longer book. For me, I think it's made me a better reader. It doesn't always pay off. It paid off for Locke Lamora. It paid off for Wheel of Time. It doesn't always, but that's okay. It's just kind of, I think, a personality thing ultimately. And I don't think it's wrong to not do that. Life is short. I completely understand. Like, life is short to read books you don't like. I understand that theory as well. So this is not an indictment of that at all. But for me, I just think there's been enough payoff that I want to give the author the entire book to convince me.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. I also am not a huge do not finish-er. I pretty much finish every book I read, even if I don't super love it. The only time I don't finish books, if I don't finish a book, it's usually at past 75% of the way through. Like,
but at that point,
if I've
don't you
basically
just want to
gotten
know
all the way through and I'm still just like, I don't really care, or like I hate this book, then I will legitimately not finish the last like 5 chapters or whatever. I'm just like, nope, I gave it a good long time and I do not like it. But I think you bring up a great point of the whole like Bookstagram, book talk culture these days being so focused on how many books one can read. And it is hard as a content creator. I think while we are mostly Cosmere, it does, we feel it around the release of a new book of like, oh God, we need to like read this as fast as possible and then start making content as fast as possible so that we can capitalize on everyone's attention being on this topic and join the conversation while the conversation is hot and happening. And I definitely felt that for Rhythm of War and like pushed myself pretty hard to read that book like twice so that we could start making content immediately. This time around, because it was a final book and like such an important release and we're not going to get another Stormlight book for many years, I really prioritized my own reading experience and was just like, I'm not going to rush. We're not going to worry about it. We're going to take our time, just like enjoy the reading experience, enjoy reading this book for the first time, you know, the only time we're going to read it for the first time. And we're just not going to stress about getting right on top of the content creation wheel again. But it's hard. It's hard when you have an audience and a community that you just feel like, oh, like kind of FOMO, you know, I want to be a part of the conversations that are happening and thinking about all the conversations that are happening without you. But I think, yeah, as a I want to say industry, but not really industry, just community of book lovers, I guess, I think we need to be a little bit more focused on our reading experience and our reading takeaways rather than just the act of finishing a book.
Yeah, I have talked to some of the content creators that are mainly on TikTok or doing short form on YouTube or Instagram, and they pretty often like vocally say it is a lot of stress to be trying to constantly creating new things, and to, you know, grow the audience, all of those aspects. We are all kind of saying the opposite, that we like pull back. But I'm wondering, have you had an experience that was like really fun riding that wave, whether it was Wind and Truth or something in the past, when it was just, we read it really fast, maybe the whole community was in it together, and it was just a joyous experience to be part of that? Are there any like really good examples that you've had previously?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in general, I've talked multiple times how I don't like reacting quickly, which I think has held me back growth-wise actually quite significantly, because I am determined to think about stuff. But I very rarely do things on time or very quickly unless I have plenty of notice. I have a family, which means that I can't just like stop everything I'm doing unless there is like a plan. Like, my husband literally one time took a day off work to be the main family person so that I could do a YouTube thing quickly. Like, that is the kind of scheduling that needs to happen. So if something just occurs, I can't cover it in a reasonable amount of time. Like, I need time. Anyway, so, but you're opposite, the fun thing. I do think actually reading Wind and Truth so quickly was fun because I was at Dragonsteel.
Yeah.
So like having read that and being one of the only people who have read it, and then was at Dragonsteel and saw the Easter eggs they put in the World Hopper Ball and these spoiler Q&As, like I felt so a part of the community. And coming home and being able to just immediately talk to people and beta readers or people who had finished it quickly was a really enjoyable experience. And I'm glad I did it because there has been a very weird negative reaction to the book. And I say weird not because a negative reaction to the book is a problem. I think there are totally valid reasons to dislike the book, but it is a different kind of dislike than I have seen with previous books, in the way that those people, not all people who disliked it, I want to be careful about this. Some people have been kind of attacking creators who did like it, which is something that I have not seen previously. I'm glad I actually got that experience first, because I've actually kind of stepped back from most Wind and Truth conversations because I am just not interested right now in being a part of that. So I'm very glad I got this incredible fun experience for the final Stormlight book on my terms. Once again, not because it's a problem. I had problems with the book. I completely understand if it's not what you wanted, but the way that that has turned online, I am glad I got to experience the camaraderie in person, which I think is one of the funnest things of fandom, is that in-person connection.
Yeah, I think that we've talked a lot about how much we liked Dragonsteel Nexus and the World Hopper Ball.
Oh, I listened to your whole episode. It put me right back, man. It was a great episode. It was such a great con this year.
It really was. It was so much fun. There was a great energy and a great vibe. And then, as you're saying, the importance of, you know, being in person and like feeling and talking to people who are having the shared universe and the shared experience. It is the wonderful part of fandom. And then, speaking for myself, but also in part for Brooke, we're very bad content creators. Like, I have no idea what you're talking about when you are saying the fandom or some people in the fandom have had this like negative reaction, not just to the book, but towards creators who liked it. I'm sure they'll get back to me eventually, but I just don't care. And I don't follow enough, in quotes, enough to be aware of that circumstance. But it is certainly an interesting aspect to witness the waves of attention or reactions, negative reactions, and just kind of like the flow. I am old enough now to remember when everyone hated the Star Wars prequels, and except for the 12-year-old me who was going to see the Star Wars prequels, who thought they were awesome.
Tyler, this is something that we can just like relate on. I have always been a prequel apologist. I will always be a prequel apologist. And we were on the right side of history. And that is something that we can just always brag about because 10-year-old me seeing The Phantom Menace, I made my dad take me 7 times to see that in the theater.
Yes.
7 times. So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt, but you were right. I was right. So good.
But there's waves to these things. I would say now for the prequels, we're like on an upward swing. There's more positive vibes about the prequels now than there was maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And I'm not going to say that I was always right because I think I went through the different waves as well. Teenage jaded me, after all of them come. But then you go back and rewatch and you're like, man, Revenge of the Sith slaps. That's a good movie.
I will admit, I didn't love Revenge of the Sith when it came out. I liked the first 2. I had problems with Revenge of the Sith. It did take me some time to come around on Revenge of the Sith. So I can't say I was fully in the right all the time.
No, you can rock your rightness as much as you would like. But the wave of things, and I'm wondering if there is this initial negative reaction. Maybe it's going back all the way to where we started with, like, there's a 5% of the audience that's being really vocal right now with their negative attitude. And then you give it 10 years and people will be feeling very different about Wind and Truth. I would say I'm almost done with my second read through now. I like it more on the second read through. Like, it is gaining praise the more that I read it. And I think that's going to continue to happen.
Yeah, I think wrap up books or, final books. I know this isn't an ending, but it is an ending. And those are always going to be hard. I think they're hard for the author. They're going to be hard for the audience because everyone has such strong feelings about what they want to happen and what they want to get out of that book, that it's really hard, I think, for a reader to come to it in a place of acceptance or like openness to the experience of the read. You're already coming in with so many expectations. So I do wonder if some of this will fade a little bit as this initial reaction dissipates. This also brings me back to a little bit of what Bookborn was saying about kind of middle books or like books that are or parts of a book that are difficult to get through, and about how it can be so rewarding to push through those books or parts of books that are a little bit more challenging or boring or whatever it is to read. And then, of course, in the Cosmere, we're all about the journey, not the destination. And I think this also might be one of those things. I think Rhythm of War also got a lot of disappointment or dislike when it first came out. And I think that reaction has dissipated a little bit. But I also wouldn't be surprised if at the end of the 10-book arc, we kind of look back and have new perspective about books 4 and 5, and maybe they are a little bit rougher. Maybe there are things about them that make them not our favorites of the whole series, but put in context of the entire journey, the entire arc, they have a place. I think it's book 5 in Harry Potter, which is I think it's the biggest one. And Harry is just like real teenagery, real
angsty
one. Yeah, and it's like a little bit of a slog. It's not the best one, but it's important. Like, you have to have that little middle piece for the whole series to hinge on. And, every book has its place, and we just have to respect and accept them for what they are and their role.
There's so much disrespect in what you just said that I have to set the record.
No.
First of all, Rhythm of War haters are incorrect. Rhythm of War was a 5 out of 5 book. Amazing. Everything about it was perfect. And haters can hate. That's fine. I actually understand when people didn't like Rhythm of War. I just loved Rhythm of War so much. And the fifth Harry Potter book was my favorite when I read it, and it remained my favorite. So again, just factually incorrect.
Love
You hate
it.
Order of the Phoenix. I was 15 when I read Order of the Phoenix, and I feel like you need to be 15
Yeah.
to understand 15-year-old Harry. The angst was real. Obviously, as an adult, as I reread that book, I understand he was going through PTSD. Okay.
Yeah, it was
I'm sorry. I'm just kidding. I totally understand what you're saying. I just had to be a little facetious there. I totally agree. Like that slower books do have a place in an overall series, and sometimes I actually have already even seen now people considering Rhythm of War and understanding its place in the Cosmere already. And so I think that is such a wonderful point. And to your point, like for me, Oathbringer was the toughest first reading experience I had. And then when I reread Oathbringer, I was like, I can't believe I ever struggled with this. Because sometimes when you first read a book, you need to know what happens.
Yeah.
And that was me with Oathbringer. I felt like everything was taking so long. I just need to know what happened. And then once I knew what happened, when I reread Oathbringer, I was able to focus a little more on the character moments that were happening. So I do think, like, I know it's unfair. I know every book shouldn't be written to be reread. But I do think Stormlight is very different on a reread. I have not started my Wind and Truth reread yet, but I am super curious about how I'm going to feel on it on a reread, because all of my Stormlight rereads have been very different experiences from the first one.
I would love to get your opinion when you do that reread, just kind of like a comparison between how you first felt and what you thought on the reread. It reminds me of a video that you did earlier that was on celebrity worship and moral art. I thought it was a truly excellent video. It had a, we'll say, like instant reaction pitch involving Neil Gaiman, but it wasn't actually about the Neil Gaiman situation, which I will just say right now, I don't really want to talk about. But the way that you handled that video and just kind of like this concept of celebrity worship and the focus that we give the creator of the work and like the author in these cases and versus the work that they create. And then this controversy that can happen or did happen in that circumstance. And then there's like this pressure to have you, a secondary creator, comment on the original creator. And I'm just wondering, how do you feel about that pressure? And has that pressure grown as your audience has grown and expanded?
Yeah, it's just tough. And it was tough in my regular life, if I should say, like and I talked about that a bit in the video, where like that pressure isn't just in a platform. Like that pressure has come to me in my regular internet presence, which isn't very big, but is still a little bit there. Yeah, I do feel that pressure. I think what it came down to is I had to just know who I was as a person. The commenters, as much as I love having a relationship with them, and like I really deeply feel like I know some of my followers and I appreciate them deeply, ultimately, like they don't know me. And I have to be okay with that. And I am going to get a comment that I might get one. I have plenty of times gotten comments that completely miscategorize me as a person, that say things about me that no one would ever say in my real life. And I end up having to step back and be like, I know who I am, and I am making steps in my own real life to be hopefully the person I want to be. And I have to make peace that I will not win universal approval on the internet. And that sucks. I would love universal approval, actually. I would like everyone to love me. And so the instinct is to make a comment about everything, to say the right thing. But I have learned that no matter how carefully I try to word things, how carefully and considerate I try to be, I do either misspeak or say something I don't intend, or people take me in the worst faith possible. And I'm still working on it, but I just have to accept like that will happen. and I cannot control it and to let it go. This is making it sound like I am much more evolved than I am. This is a very difficult thing to do, but I am working on it constantly. And I don't like empty words. And I am tired of this rat race of content to capitalize on some of the worst things that are happening. And so I just don't really want to participate in it.
I agree. There is the phrase or the concept of rage baiting, and it's so easy to, it's the juiciest worm, and all the fish love to swim up towards it. When there is the potential of rage, you want to feel that rage yourself, but you also want to have everyone around agree with that rage. And then you can all be outraged together. And that pressure to like always be commenting, always be displaying, how you feel or what your political stance is or your moral stance is. It is a difficult one, I think, in part because it makes it harder to experience that Dalinar-esque change over time if you are constantly being held to the things that you said in the past or like the moments that you had in the past. If everyone's like, well, in 2019 you did this, this, and this, and that means that you are this type of person.
Because everyone wants you to comment, but then they also want those comments to be unchanging forever.
Yes. And so it's just such a strange dichotomy or a strange aspect of the internet where, as you said earlier, it's not always the same when you're having a conversation in person, and nobody would really hold you to those types of things or be unrecognizing of just like the fluid nature. And once you do make a video or make a comment or a podcast and say things, then it's like the definitive locked in version for all time. And so I thought that video that you did on celebrity worship and morality in art was a great example of what I wish more and more people were willing to like be comfortable with the flexibility. So thank you for making that video.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I just appreciate about your content in general, Bookborn, is it feels very genuine in a way where I feel like I'm hearing and sort of conversing with, sharing ideas with a real person who has like thought deeply about what they're saying. It's, like you said, you don't do a lot of instant reaction type videos. There's a lot of thought that is in the scripts that you write. And I think you do a great job of resisting all of the algorithm traps that exist in the content creation space that I absolutely don't fault anyone for using or falling into or, any of the above. I just find that your videos feel grounded and fresh in an environment that can feel very loud and extreme.
I really appreciate that. That's a very kind thing to say. I will say, I do get grumpy over the algorithm thing, though. Like, I did maybe complain. I was like, look, I am proud of that Gaiman video I put out, even though it wasn't really about him. It was a lot of work for me, and it was like really difficult to make, but I am proud of how it came out. And I did like jokingly say to my husband, like, but it's not getting viewed like a fraction of what every other Gaiman video is getting viewed because I did it completely wrong. I didn't do it right away. I didn't put his name in the title because I didn't really want to. And it's this weird esoteric video that really doesn't talk at all about what happened. And it's everything the algorithm doesn't want.
Yes.
And sometimes that is tough. Like, I'm not pretending I'm here being like, I don't care, because I do. Like, I do care. I just ultimately am so unwilling to do what I need to do. And like, I'm so stubborn. And my husband has this joke. He's like, you complain all the time about your lack of growth because you don't follow the algorithm. And then you absolutely 100% refuse to do it. And I'm like, I know, because I don't want to. I just want to complain about how it works.
Yeah, the problem is not that you are not conforming to the algorithm, right? Like, the problem is, why does the algorithm not value the things that are actually valuable, which are the things that you are making? And, there are other creators too, but
I think the other stuff is valuable. I think there's a lot of value in being able to react quickly in some ways and get news out there. Although I do think that sometimes the quick reactions lack a lot of nuance because our first reaction is usually our most emotional one.
Yeah.
I don't like to be party to my emotions, and that has been my whole life. So I usually have a very intense emotional reaction to something, and I never ever want to act in that moment, which is why it takes me a while. I usually, I had this huge emotional reaction to the game and news, and then I waited. And I waited and I waited and I waited and waited, and then I talked about it. And the video I made is very different than if I had made a video right when it happened.
Yeah.
And that's just like a personal choice on how I am. But I think there's room for both things. Unfortunately, it's not necessarily like the algorithm's fault or any creator's fault. We have a fast news cycle, and that's just how the world is moving today. And I can't really fault anyone or say it's better or worse. Like I'm uncomfortable, saying it's bad.
Yeah.
But I do wish we let some breathability in some of these issues. But something you said earlier, Tyler, the other hard thing about being a content creator with your guys' podcast, with my videos or any kind of thing, is it's not really emulating a real conversation. Because in this conversation here, you can say something and then I say something and you can be like, oh, sorry, that's not quite what I meant. Let me rephrase. And then it's like, oh, we understand each other. But when you put out a podcast, it is static now.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. You can respond to comments, but it's not that same flow.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had that problem too, where I maybe flippantly say something that I didn't quite mean, and then I get like 30 comments about it. And it's like, oh, I didn't mean it that way. And I explain it in the comment and people are like, oh, I see. But then I have to do it like 50 times and the conversation has totally ended.
Yeah.
And so I do think that's another issue with internet communities. Like no matter how hard we're trying to understand each other, it is not a living conversation. It is static. And that is always going to affect our content.
That's absolutely true. And very difficult to deal with, because how else, we don't necessarily have the perfect technology that can just, connect our brains so that we always are in a living conversation going back and forth. And maybe that would help. Maybe that would just be too weird outside of even in a marital relationship. I think that would probably be a little bit too much.
There's some short stories you should read about that.
Oh,
have you?
Yeah. Do you know them
We'll
off the
talk
top of your head?
after.
Yeah, that's totally fine. That sounds very interesting. But I think that when it comes to that concept of a static conversation and then you're responding, to 50 different comments, kind of saying the same thing, which wasn't actually the point of the video that you were making in the first place, that is just very difficult. And it's like a difficulty of the medium. But then as you mentioned, I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing. Like there was a difficulty of plays, a theatrical performance versus a movie versus a TV show versus writing a book. Like all of these things have their limitations and their challenges. So yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily a good or a bad thing, but it definitely is a thing. And it's something that needs to be recognized and understood.
I think that's a difference between videos and podcasts as well. Like we were talking about before, with a video, you get immediate feedback. There's like a very clear method for the audience to react, because it usually is a reaction, right? Immediately, sometimes even as they are still watching the video, commenting on something that maybe they haven't necessarily had a chance to really think about. Versus a podcast, there's not a quick way to react to a podcast. And so people are kind of forced to at least get through the rest of the hour-long podcast and like percolate, get some space, like think about whatever it was that jumped out to them for whatever reason. And then if it's really important, they can like find our page and send us an email. But there's like a built-in gap that gets rid of that instant reaction that you were talking about earlier.
So are you telling me I should become a podcaster?
I'm just saying there's pros and cons for sure. We also sometimes feel like we're just shouting into the void because we can't tell if there's anyone out there. So,
You do have podcaster vibes though. So if that's a route that you want to go down, you don't need to do the video all the time. You can
I
just...
think you would be a great podcaster.
Okay.
Always,
good to know.
Always welcome as a guest if you want to just test it out here and there. But I think one of the things that you brought up is that video on celebrity worship hasn't done as well numerically as many of your other videos, or the other videos that happen to be about Neil Gaiman, those like reaction videos. And I'm curious if there is something that you see as like a major difference between your best performing and your worst performing videos.
It's complicated.
Of course.
Obviously, a video that is timely is always going to do better immediately. So when I am able to make the stars align and do something timely, so I did that with like Wheel of Time reaction content, which is something I knew when all the episodes were coming out, so I could really plan for it. Wind and Truth is another one I planned for. Those always do very well. And I know that I would be growing a lot faster if I prioritized doing that. Last year, my goal was to do something timely every month, and I did not do it once. So it went great. I gave up on it. It just like I can't get it together. So those always do really well. But it's usually things that have wide appeal, right? So things that are major series are going to do so much better. I wish that my video essays sometimes did better. They do okay a lot of the times. That's what I love making. But the thing is for people to find your content at my size, right? When I'm small like this, they have to be searching for it. So it has to be something that people are searching for. And a lot of my content is like literally the stuff I think about when I can't fall asleep. And that's not things people are searching for. So I believe in those videos, and my followers who are already following me like those videos, but they don't really do much for growth because no one's using search functions. And so that's like a really tough thing, is like being able to make content that is sometimes searched for, but I have to do it authentically. So like I was super lucky with A Song of Ice and Fire when I chose to read it because I wanted to read it. And then I just happened to love it. And that's a big enough series that people are searching for it. So it kind of stars aligned, and it was everything I love. But when's the next thing that will stars align? I don't know. It's not predictable for me because as much as I want to grow, books are my love and passion, and I'm not going to make it work.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to force myself to read something or react to something just because it's big. I just have no interest in it. And that's why I'm also a bad YouTuber.
Yeah. We can relate as like bad podcasters. We also have a similar vibe where we started doing this because it was fun, and it has gotten, a lot bigger than we ever thought it was going to be. We started podcasting in 2016.
Yeah, 2017.
2017.
I didn't realize you guys had been doing it that long.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We were the second Cosmere focused podcast, second only to the official Cosmere podcast. So, yeah, when we started, it was such a like joke almost, where we were just like, wouldn't it be funny if we made a podcast that was all about the Cosmere? Like, what a wild, funny thing. And it has gone much better than we ever thought that it would. But our policy is still always like, if it ever starts to become stressful or feels like work, then we need to take a step back or like change something. It should always be fun. It should always be something that we are enjoying. We started it to be fun, and like that is the goal.
Yeah, that difference that I don't know how I would like rank them. It's not necessarily a hierarchy, but there's definitely creators out there who are focusing on the more reaction or the more like constant creation of new work and putting that out there, fast and routine. And then we are on the other side of the spectrum, when our like general philosophy, the way that I phrase it, is I feel like we're creating books in a library that you can just one day walk through the digital library and pick up whatever one you want and just be like, I don't know, Shalon Devar, cool. And just like grab one of our episodes for whatever topic you happen to be interested in. But podcasts are a very different medium in that way than something like YouTube. And the growth algorithms on YouTube are geared to specifically reward certain things rather than other things. And you have this very clear aspect that Brooke was mentioning. There's like an authenticity to the work that you're creating. So you can't be authentic and be chasing the algorithm. Those two things don't really line up.
And, I mean, sometimes they do.
Both of you are synced now at this point. They do sometimes link up. And that's like what I wanted to ask about, is even if it wasn't the best performing video that you could create, what is your favorite type of video to create? What's just like the one that you want to do most often, or the one that you see yourself returning to the most often?
I do want to say, like, Brooke and I were on the same page. I don't think like it's not authentic if you are an algorithm. Like, I actually am just envious of you if you are able to do that. Like, I'm envious of some of these people who can, first of all, put out a video as often as they do, because I also post like way less than I should as a booktuber. And you're so good at it. Like, you're so good at knowing what the algorithm wants. Like, I am actually jealous of that. Please help me, just to be clear. But my favorite video is a video essay. I freaking love a video essay a video where I just get to research stuff. I love to research. And sometimes that's hard when I'm doing a video a week because I could research for like 2 months. Like, if I had time and I didn't have to try to be consistent to grow in some small capacity, I would just like rabbit hole deep dive and then just tell you guys all of this stuff I found out. That's my favorite. And sometimes I'm obliged and those videos do well, and sometimes they do terribly, but I still enjoyed making them. And so that's what matters.
Yeah, one of my favorite creators, longtime creator, CGP Grey, he probably makes, or at least was for a while, making like 1 or 2 videos a year. And he's picked it up a little bit because he has hired editors and like a team to help him. But he calls that the forest of lost knowledge when he's doing research, and then he just gets sidetracked into the forest of lost knowledge. And he'll just spend months researching things that don't make it into the video because he can't find a way to incorporate what he thought was interesting and, you know, was worthy of his time, and like reading books and going down YouTube or internet rabbit holes of just like learning more and more. But that doesn't necessarily always translate back into a producible video. And it's always interesting to hear like how people deal with that. Do you love the forest of lost knowledge? Do you try to avoid it so that you can remain on topic or on algorithm, and like where that balance is struck?
Yeah, I am a forest of lost knowledge. I am the forest of lost
the
knowledge.
whole thing.
I'm the whole thing. You know what's funny is I would say my videos are like an iceberg, and the research I've done, I've cut out everything under here, and I've just given you the tip. There's so many times where I've cut out entire sections, which is why I use the word script. I don't actually read a script or anything. Like, when I get on camera, I just talk. I'm not reading. I write a script to organize my thoughts, because in doing that, I'm able to reorganize where information should go. And then ultimately, and very difficultly, be like, this doesn't need to be here. And I will cut entire sections ruthlessly. And then I will film and do it again in editing. I will be listening and be like, I think we've gotten off track a little bit. And I will ruthlessly cut that and edit on the editing floor. And so generally in my research videos, there was a lot there that just totally doesn't get put in. I've been following a YouTuber named Jenny Nicholson for like 10 years. Are you guys Jenny Nicholson fans?
I know her, but I wouldn't say either of us are fans.
Okay. She's like my ideal process. She makes like, now she had to do the whole YouTube thing where she was making consistent videos, but now she is so famous that she makes like a video a year that's 4 hours. And that is like, that is me. Like, she is my spirit animal. And it's just like every possible detail. And she knows everything about this subject. And I watch these like multiple times because I like to be the arbiter of useless knowledge. And I've been that way since I was a child, by the way. Like, my parents have jokes about it from when I was a kid that I always had a random fact. Like, I always was the person, like, if they said something, here comes Bookborn to just say some random thing you read one time about the 3-second rule. Like, I was always talking about, well, I read an article once. Like, I just like to know things. And so that's my favorite video. But I am not Jenny Nicholson. So I need to make like 20 to 30 minute videos on accessible content and really edit myself.
The stuff that ends up on the cutting room floor, do you think about turning that into like short form content for either YouTube Shorts or Instagram to kind of make use of those chunks that maybe didn't make sense in the whole, but are like fun nuggets for your fans?
I think they wouldn't do well as shorts because this is my problem with shorts is like my videos need the whole thing. Like it even frustrates me when people try to comment before. I'm like, this is like a topic that I have 10 parts to, and all of the parts are important. So I struggle with short form. I think if anything, they'd actually end up on a Patreon. Like I have been thinking of maybe starting one just as a place to put cutting room floor and other thoughts that can't make a full video, because I think those are the type of people who might appreciate like a tangent.
Yeah.
Hopefully. So that's, I think, where they'd maybe find a home.
Yeah. That's a great point. Like offer them to your biggest fans, the people that you know would be interested. Because I'm sitting here like, I want to know all of it. Like I want to know what gets cut before you film. I want to know what gets cut after you film. Like I want all the extra pieces. I understand they can't make it into the video, but I would like to see them.
So there's your call to make sure to start a Patreon so that Brooke and I can get the cutting room floor stuff. I do think that would be wonderful. If you do not have a Patreon, you should. And for all the listeners, you should go over to our Patreon, because that's a wonderful way to support content creators. It is very difficult to do this algorithm chasing or to find the specific audience via YouTube or via Apple Podcasts that like gets directly to the audience that is going to be most appreciative of that work. But with a Patreon, the people are coming to you and saying like, I'm interested, here's $1 or $5 or whatever it happens to be. And then you already know that those people are going to react a certain way to the content that you are producing. And I think that is a positive feedback loop rather than the negative feedback loop that we were talking about earlier with some of those like random internet commenters. And so certainly if you start a Patreon, we'll join. It'll be over there real quick.
Great. It can just be us three.
Yeah, perfect. That's going to be the most awesome Patreon. Okay, well, this has been a really wonderful conversation, but the more that we're talking about the nerdy aspects of content creating, that's what I'm actually interested in. The algorithm, never really that interesting to me. But what I want to know is, what is the program or the suite of programs that you are using to help with your research? What ways do you kind of like organize your thoughts? And this is probably not what the algorithm wants in terms of hot questions from Bookborn, but it's really what I want to know, is just kind of like, what's the way that you go about doing some research into a new topic?
So first it starts in my head. Generally, when I'm doing an insomnia at night, when I can't fall asleep for hours, or in the shower, lots of video concepts, me talking out loud to myself in the shower. Just there. That's where it starts. Then it's a Word document. I write all my stuff on a Word document, and then it is searching the internet where I'm copying and pasting and keeping like 30 tabs open in case I want to go back to them. And then it's like, oh, they mentioned this book, I'm going to download it. I've bought books just to make sure that a single quote was actually said in that book, because I'm also like really particular about sourcing. So if I read a quote and then I have had to buy books to see the whole chapter and what it's actually about, tab up books. A lot of my books will be tabbed up, like color coded for a different video idea. So then once I have all that in a Word document, then I have to do like another Word document. Sometimes it's like 2 or 3. Like for my recent Catelyn video, I don't know if you guys are a Song of Ice and Fire fans, but I did this Catelyn video that had like 4 Word documents, and they were labeled like Catelyn thoughts, more Catelyn thoughts, Catelyn research thoughts, and then like it was like a sticky note. So we got all of them, and then it goes into a final, which is like where I'm writing out sentences, even though I don't read them. To get out full thoughts. And that will be like the final document I use to film from. And that's like generally the process. It's not like, it's free form. It's just lots of thoughts until I have enough thoughts and enough research where I think I can write something down into a cohesive video. And I should say, like, I have a lot of documents like that die there. Like I have a lot of research documents that it didn't get enough. Like I have a research document for personalities in fantasy, and there's stuff on that document and it never felt good enough or full enough, never got out of that research stage, and it just lives there. And maybe I can come back to it in the future, and maybe not.
I always find that aspect of like how people organize their thoughts and how they go from the shower thought, that moment that I think everybody has, the when you're just like, oh, that's interesting. But then to take that moment in the shower, to apply it, and then to circle back and to do the extra research to go out, find that book, get the one paragraph quote that you were looking for. Yes, it is an accurate quote. And then to move on, you're writing the full document and your script out. And then to get to the moment of creation is not what most people do. And so I think it's always interesting to hear from creators like yourself that are actually going through all of those steps and then kind of the after process as well, which is what we spent a lot of the episode talking about, kind of like what happens after you publish something. But I also find what happens leading up to the publishing of a video really interesting. So thank you very much for sharing that little bit of a Bookborn process. But it kind of leads to a natural question, and maybe this is a natural ending question. If you do research all the time, then there's got to be something that you're researching right now that you're really excited about in the future. Care to, let us know what maybe you're really interested in at the moment?
Well, I have been thinking more about morality in fantasy. So I'm like considering talking about that again. I don't know how. I've been doing kind of a lot of research on that again. But the thing I am lightly starting to research right now are two things. I got two ones coming up. One is religion and A Song of Ice and Fire. That's a more fantasy-based research. It's a little easier because I'm within a fantasy framework. Mm-hmm. The other one is why in most fantasy and just a lot of fiction are intelligence and empathy so often at odds. So Tarvangian's a great example of a character where that is on display in quite a pointed way, where the fantasy is using to absolutely pinpoint that dichotomy. But that dichotomy is actually seen in a lot of fantasy. Classic example I think of is actually something J.K. Rowling said about Hagrid versus Dumbledore, that she needed Harry to have a few surrogate parents, and that Hagrid represent red and warmth, and Albus represented white and intelligence, and how somehow those things cannot always coexist. In that framework is kind of how she phrased it. And the more I look at children's fiction and our fiction, I just noticed that. So that's what I'm starting to research right now. That might not come to anything, but I want it to come to something.
That's very interesting. I'm intrigued by that concept, and I hope there's a video from you about that soon.
We'll see.
I agree. I really hope that there is more to come on those topics and any other topics that happen to strike your fancy. It has been really wonderful to get to talk with you about the Cosmere, about Wind and Truth, and about just the process of creation. So thank you very much for being here. When we say goodbye here, we like to do so with the first ideal and would love if you would join us. And on that note, Brooke, can you take us away?
Until next time, life before death.
Strength before weakness.
Journey before destination.